Fevered Publishing presents Metal Lies, Shadowfast Action Thriller 2 by Cole Chase. Read by the author, Cole Chase.
Chapter 15. "You exceed expectations," the man gloats. Quinn says, "Speaking as a ragtag band of misfits, that's on brand for us." In the Columbia Center private conference room, the vibe differs from Shadowfast's first meeting with Ben Sinister. Quinn remains wary, while Ben Sinister seems elated. Quinn, Manny, and Danny lounge at the conference table in chairs closest to the French doors. Quinn wears a black leather jacket, while Manny showed up in fringed buckskin. With his hair down and the tats on the back of his hands showing, Manny looks rough and badass, a strong counterpoint to the wardrobe at the other end of the table. Kerkhoff sits at the head wearing a cashmere cardigan and swiveling in his chair more like a hyperactive fourth grader than a former president of the United States. Mitnick struts at the far end, the very picture of conservative business, in a tailored white blouse, a navy blazer, navy slacks, and sensible flats. She completes her ensemble by holding a laser pointer remote for the conference room's projector. Bodyguards still observe from each of the room's four corners, exuding ready-to-leap attention. A gangly Indian man with a prominent nose sits quietly between the groups, hands folded in his lap. He looks attentive but makes no eye contact with anyone. Quinn can't get a solid read on the meek Indian, but he supposes the man is an engineer or a programmer. To the man's left, a gray-haired senior citizen watches the room with an aloof, guarded gaze. Quinn keeps noticing the man assessing him, but whenever Quinn stares back, the man looks away. To Quinn's practiced eye, the man's haircut and posture read military. He assumes this is another member of Ben Sinister's network of trust. Mitnick hits a button on her remote, and the lights dim. Sunlight still pours through the two glass walls opening out to Seattle and Puget Sound far below, but the strong projector overcomes the sun enough to display a vivid image of Brody Bach on the screen. He is ringing the bell at NASDAQ on the day Sky House went public. The man and the senior citizen realize the projector blasts right in their faces. They awkwardly execuglide their chairs to either side of the table, then swivel so they can watch the screen without twisting their necks. Mitnick removes her oversized glasses. "We'll get to introductions as we go," she says. "Our purpose in this session is to summarize the evidence Shadowfast has provided from their trip to Seoul, decide what it means, and choose next steps. Nothing shared today leaves this room without express permission from the former president." For the benefit of the two new people, Mitnick begins. "In the first 2 quarters of this year, our government contacts in banking, the Federal Reserve, and the Internal Revenue Service separately became aware of suspicious transactions, which they independently reported to Ben Sinister." She forwards the slide. A spreadsheet, meaningless to Quinn, appears on the wall. These were 8-figure dollar transactions conveyed through a series of cutouts and shell companies to Brody Bach from representatives of the People's Republic of China and state agents of Russia. Bottom line, we want to know why it appears the Russian and Chinese governments are bribing a U.S. tech billionaire. The next slide shows Shadowfast's publicity photo, with the whole band in full metal costumes. Quinn, once again, thanks himself for coming up with the executioner mask bit, as their faces remain unrecognizable. "We hired a crew having no previous government affiliation to investigate. We wanted to see data on a computer in a shell company named Noble Mountain, which Bach set up in cooperation with the Chinese. The crew gained access to the data while disguised as a rock band named Shadowfast." "Metal band," Manny and Danny both correct. Mitnick acknowledges with nothing more than a puzzled glance. The next slide displays the Noble Mountain and Skyhouse logos. She continues. Shadowfast provided us with that data. It is quantum encrypted, so we have not yet decoded it and may not be able to. However, the metadata shows the data originates from servers in Bach's aerospace company, Skyhouse. The data also shows IP addresses from other aerospace firms, including NASA, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Boeing, and Raytheon. The next slide shows a sophisticated woman with curly gray hair and tasteful earrings, speaking from a lectern. Text at the bottom of the picture identifies her as astrophysicist Dr. Margaret Kohler. Her name sounds familiar to Quinn, but he can't place it until Mitnick's next comments. This was America's leading expert on orbital mechanics until she was murdered early this year in Seattle. Someone hacked a fleet of self-driving cars with facial recognition software, training the cars to seek and destroy Dr. Kohler. I'll return to this shortly to explain why it's related. During this slide, Quinn notes the Indian man's facial expressions and body language. He first looks alert, then angry. Then his brown eyes moisten. A file photo of an FBI agent's ID badge fills the wall. Quinn recognizes the target who pursued them to his death, south of downtown Seattle. Some of the money the Russians and Chinese paid to Bach wound up in the accounts of FBI Special Agent Jake Mooney. We suspected him of selling classified data to Bach via more cutouts that lead back to Skyhouse. The data came from Mooney's girlfriend, an employee in the U.S. Department of Transportation. She was an admin for the co-chair of the National Executive Committee for Space-Based Positioning, Navigation, and Timing. We do not have the details we want because when we attempted to render Mooney for interrogation, he died in a vehicle accident. The senior citizen opens his mouth as if to object. Mitnick hastens to add, "No fault of ours. A third party hacked the traffic lights in a several-block radius so that the signals showed green in all directions. A freight truck plowed into Mooney's car because both vehicles believed they had the right of way." The senior citizen closes his mouth but looks cross. Quinn wonders what the guy's angle is. "Note the through line," the man says. "Data apparently stolen from aerospace companies, data passed on from space-based positioning, the murder of a world expert on orbital mechanics." The senior citizen grumpily waves off the comments. "I'm tracking. I'm not stupid." Quinn decides the guy reminds him of a more fit version of Mr. Potter, the evil banker from It's a Wonderful Life. The next slide shows a satellite picture looking straight down on a city. Text identifies it as Seoul. Next, let me recap what Shadowfast learned in Korea. The senior citizen interrupts. Who or what is Shadowfast? The band I mentioned earlier, think of it as a code name, Mitnick says. Independent contractors who investigated on our behalf. Mr. Potter repeats in a moron-prissy voice, an exaggerated imitation of Mitnick. A code name. Of course, but who are they? Quinn says mildly, "We're the ones who risked our lives to bring you this intel." Mr. Potter glares at Quinn. Quinn glares back. "I don't like the cut of your jib," the senior citizen says. Quinn, Manny, and Danny laugh. "What qualifies you to do this work?" Mr. Potter demands. "Do you have security clearance?" Quinn nods at the man. "Those are questions for him." Mr. Potter splutters. Quinn half expects him to jowl blather, "Well, I never," like the movie. The man looks disoriented. The man intervenes. "Play nice, men. We're all on the same side." "I guess I shouldn't have skipped introductions," Mitnick says. She dons her glasses again to read from a clipboard. "Quinn, the man asking very reasonable questions of you is retired 4-star General Carl Schaefer, former Space Operations Command Field Commander and later Chief of Space Operations." She looks up, removing her glasses. "We need his deep knowledge of space strategy if our beliefs about Skyhouse prove correct." Schaefer harumphs as if vindicated. Retired, Quinn needles, as in, no longer has any rank? Mind your manners, the man warns. Quinn shrugs. At forward operating bases in Afghanistan, he and his friends took incoming every day, putting their bodies on the line for their country, while grumpy bastards like General Schaefer talk tough from desks in Virginia. He finds his tone perfectly appropriate. Mitnick eyes Quinn and General Schaefer, then decides to plunge ahead. She forwards the slide to a photo of an ordinary-looking smartphone. Shadowfast brought back from Seoul copious evidence of Bach's plans. They obtained the phone of Bach's chief of security, Callum Harwell, an Australian citizen here on a work visa. They were able to set the phone's password, enabling us to forward the phone to the NSA ready for examination. She forwards to the next slide, which makes Manny wince and Quinn smile. It's a still from the drone video taken when it accidentally descended right onto the Russian woman meeting Brody behind the cathedral. The woman looks up into the camera, startled and overexposed. Mitnick continues. They provided video recordings of Bach meeting with a known Russian agent. They have both a video recording of the Russian agent giving money to Bach and an eyewitness of the transaction. Quinn maintains a pleasant expression but thinks, some eyewitness, good luck trying to get Nightboy into a federal court to testify. While shadowing Bach, Shadowfast had to contend with bodyguards, Mitnick continues. Her next slide shows 5 portraits of Chinese soldiers. The file photos were responses from the database when Quinn used his facial recognition app on the man who fought him on the sidewalks of Togiro, the 3 men Nightboy killed at the industrial market, and the one Quinn shot who tried to shoot Nightboy. His account omitted the fact that his team killed 4 of the 5. All of these are agents, Ministry of State Security, Political and Economic Intelligence Division, People's Republic of China. The Chinese state was protecting Bach during his trip to Seoul. The next slide has a frozen video frame with a play icon large in the center. They also recorded Bach meeting with Chinese state representatives. This is drone footage taken outside of the Westin Joseon Seoul's 16th floor. The drone could not get audio of the meeting. However, Bach faces the camera straight on and clearly. The audio you're about to hear is a lip reader interpreting what Bach says. Quinn, Manny, and Danny exchange glances. They hadn't thought of the possibility of a lip read. It makes their footage more valuable. Mitnick presses play. A loading icon spins for a second, then the video plays. Bach and Harwell face the camera, with 2 black-haired heads in the foreground. The footage wobbles from the drone auto-balancing against gusts of wind near the high-rise. Bach's mouth moves, and a second later they hear the voice of a woman interpreter. She reads in a flat, unaffected tone, with no dramatic interpretation. I have cleared each milestone as agreed. I have demonstrated mastery over U.S. GPS. Bach listens as one of the heads moves a little bit, presumably answering. Then Bach, in the interpreter's voice again. There is a simple solution, but it requires trust. The head in the foreground presumably responds with a single word, as almost immediately, Bach talks again. If you synchronize your launch systems with mine, I can transmit the command. If the command comes from American soil, they cannot claim China attacked. More inaudible response from the dark head. The woman interpreter says in her clinical tone what Bach says next. Yes, the Russians have done so. Mitnick pauses the video. We have 20 minutes of footage. There's no need to view it now. In summary, in this footage, Bach admits to performing various stages of subverting U.S. GPS, receiving payment for each milestone from both Russia and China, and proposing a coordinated attack that he intends to initiate on behalf of each country. General Schaefer has watched with his elbow propped on the table and his chin on the heel of his palm. He drops his arm, sits up, and asks, "Attack on what?" I'm getting to that. Mitnick forwards to the next slide, a collage lining up the faces of the Chinese soldiers, the Russian female agent, Bach and Harwell, and the beginning of the lip reader's transcript. She seems to admire her own work. Quinn doesn't blame her. Suddenly, he feels proud of what his crew accomplished on their first international expedition. Mitnick concludes, "We can project with high confidence what Russia and China have paid Bach to do. Gentlemen, he's planning to take down the U.S. Global Positioning Satellite System." Schaefer starts to react, but Quinn can't tell if he is shocked or in agreement, because suddenly the old man breaks into a prolonged, wet coughing fit. It goes on until the general's face turns beet red. The man stands and offers helpless encouragement, patting one of the general's shoulders. Finally, the coughing spell ends. Schaefer sits panting. He looks gutted. The man looks up. "We'll take a break. The general understands the implications. Gloria, perhaps you can find a private space downstairs to explain the stakes to our very successful spies." Quinn, in all his strategizing, action plans, and ops, has just been putting one foot in front of the other. He never labeled what they were doing. Now he realizes, spies? We're spies. He doesn't know how the word fits him and his team. It's cool and not cool. It implies both danger and the safety of government support, which has its own dangers. It feels like his soul has put its shoes on the wrong feet. Chapter 16. Mitnick offers them lunch. So Mitnick, Quinn, Manny, Danny, the Indian guy, and one of the suited guards ride the elevators down to the food court. Then they mill around inefficiently as each person decides what they want from 30 different food kiosks. Quinn, accustomed to bringing order to his crew, feels ridiculous trailing around randomly in a big group. 20 minutes pass before they settle at 3 two-top tables tucked away at one end of the food court. The Secret Service guy stands with his back to them, facing outward. Quinn thinks it's the opposite of low profile. On the other hand, having a stern-looking guard works effectively to keep other office workers out of earshot. Mitnick swallows a bite of her Caesar salad and resumes the conversation. "GPS," she says. Echoing Quinn's thoughts, Manny jumps in. "He wants to take down all of it?" Mitnick looks sober. "Nothing short of that would be worth the money he's getting from 2 countries. Nothing short of that would serve the interests of both those countries. In the transcript from your drone footage, he practically says it straight out." "But how?" Danny asks. "Many satellites make GPS 31, the Indian guy offers around a bite of butter chicken. "Yes," Danny accepts. "So how can he take out that many satellites?" "Monjanath," Mitnick begins, but Quinn interrupts. "Wait, how is this even a big deal?" "Okay, without GPS, we can't use the computer nav in our cars. We go back to looking at paper maps again." "So what?" Mitnick eyes him with an unreadable expression. She chews a piece of lettuce, calculating. Then she says, "I want you to get it. Walk through an ordinary day and I'll tell you when the lack of GPS affects you." Quinn wipes sauce from his barbecue burger off his hands. "Walk through? Like, how does your day begin?" "I wake up, I look at my phone to see what time it is." "Your phone gets the time from GPS." Quinn blinks. "Really?" Manny says, "There's some steps in between, but ultimately, yes." "Okay." "Going anywhere in your imaginary day?" Mitnick asks. "Sure, but first I'll call Danny to see if he wants to come along." "Maybe not. Cell phone multiplexing depends upon GPS." "Multi? Okay, whatever. Say I drive to Danny's house. I get that there's no nav, but I know the way." "Still a problem," Mitnick says. "Half the traffic lights don't work, maybe all of them. Depends what part of town." "Huh? What do traffic lights have to do with GPS?" "They also get time from GPS. How long is a green light green? If a yellow light is supposed to last 15 seconds, what tells it when 15 seconds are up? Manny, interpreting for Mitnick, tells Quinn, each satellite has an atomic clock on board. It's so reliable that lots of time-based systems refer to GPS, so there's one authority declaring the time. Fine, Quinn says. If I can't go anywhere, I'll stay home and do some online shopping. Maybe, Mitnick allows. Maybe not. Why not? Time again. Amazon Web Services uses thousands and thousands of servers to host Amazon online and to host thousands of client businesses. If anything goes wrong, they troubleshoot by reading the server logs. If all those servers don't agree on the precise time, there's no way to correlate their logs. Maybe server A thinks it's 1 o'clock, but server B thinks it's 1 o'clock and 2 seconds. Without GPS, no umpire. Times 1,000 servers? Nightmare. Quinn sits back from the table. So, hypothetically, my phone's wonky, traffic's messed up, cell reception is messed up. Online shopping, and I presume a lot of the internet, is out of whack. What the hell doesn't GPS touch? What can I do? The Indian guy has a knowing smile. He feeds Mitnick a straight line. Why not take a trip? Without GPS, all commercial airlines are grounded, she says. Trains don't run. Ships at sea cannot be accounted for. Realistically, they all can function at some level, but no one flies a jumbo jet visually unless it's an emergency. BASF tracks every train car with GPS. Danny, ever the warrior, pauses over his udon noodles. Defense? Mitnick nods. Without GPS, we're blind. Russia fires a missile at us. How would we know? If we know, how would we locate it to intercept? If we fire a missile, how would we guide it? Every day I run, Danny says. He briefly lifts his phone off the table. I have an app, tracks how far I went today and my route. Mitnick smiles grimly. Not in our scenario. The app uses GPS. Look, you can hardly list everything GPS touches. GPS lets us track buoys on the tides and livestock on the range. Find my phone, delivery trucks, pets with chips in their ears, weather prediction. Bottom line, without GPS, the U.S. is confused and terribly vulnerable. We estimate business losses at $1 billion every day. And that's without another nation deciding to kick us while we're down. But our enemies lose GPS too, Danny says. We think not, Mitnick says, while the Indian guy shakes his head, no. Russia has their own GPS system, named GLONASS. China has theirs, called Beidou. Quinn sits in shock. He had little idea how many ways GPS weaves into his average American day. The cavernous food court echoes with a murmur of random conversations, line cooks banging spatulas on grills, an espresso machine grinding beans, piped-in music, all of it blurred from bouncing off concrete and tile. The chaos mirrors the thoughts firing in his mind. So, basically, he says, trying to net it out, without GPS, we go back to the Stone Age. That overstates it a little. Call it Stone Age 2.0, Mitnick says. 1970. Chapter 17. Quinn trades looks with Manny and Danny. For small-time con artists, this is next-level shit. But how? Manny objects. DEF CON had a satellite hacking contest last year. I know it's possible to hack a satellite, but not easy. Hacking 30 of them? I don't see it. Mitnick says, I think it's time you met our other guest. She looks to the lanky Indian guy. Gentlemen, we are honored to have with us today Manjnath Hegde. He is a leading astrobiologist in his own right. He was also the scientist walking with Dr. Koehler when she was murdered. That incident has given him powerful motivation to puzzle out how this threat could work. Mr. Hegde, could you please explain how you believe it's possible to wipe out U.S. GPS? The nerdy Indian guy nods. He pulls out a laptop from a nylon case. Manny and Danny help him scoot cups and plates and plastic cutlery to clear space for the laptop. which he uses to display his presentation. When they're done, the beautiful 5K HDR laptop screen shows the Milky Way. Hegde takes in his audience for a moment. Quinn sees he's not used to presenting. His upper body sways and he twists a drinking straw nervously between his hands. "This topic is not my specialty," he admits. "I worked on this to honor my colleague, Dr. Kohler. She would have seen this instantly. I believe that is why she was killed. But it took me months to work it out. Recently I learned the theory I will now show you was the subject of her speech. She died before she could present it." Mitnick speaks gently. "You'll do fine. Just remember, we are laymen here. Explain it as if you are speaking to your children." "Ah," Hegde says. Quinn can see him mentally recalibrating his approach. He reaches out and taps the laptop's trackpad. Suddenly, the presentation swings in a smooth animation, turning from the Milky Way to focus on Earth, floating in space. It zooms in closer, revealing lots of little satellites circling the globe. "At the beginning of 2021, Hegde narrates, the Union of Concerned Scientists tracked 6,542 satellites orbiting Earth." Surprise sounds escape from Quinn, Manny, and Danny. The view in the presentation angles around so that the viewer hovers in space between the Earth and a ring of orbiting satellites. "Half of these satellites are in low Earth orbit, or LEO," Hegde continues. "This is where GPS satellites orbit, roughly 12,500 miles above the center of the Earth. The satellites have different foci, and none have an eccentricity of 0, so even though their parabola and hyperparabolas differ, Quinn feels a fog bank descend on his mind. He's relieved when Mitnick reminds Hegde, "Explain as if to children, please." Hegde was leaning forward, absorbed in his own presentation, and the interruption makes his body rock back. He turns to Mitnick. "I'm trying to ensure my narrative is correct." "We don't know your fancy terminology," Mitnick says. "Correct is not as important as I understand." Hegde nods, thinks, faces the laptop again. SpaceX and Amazon, plus other private parties, have permission from the U.S. government to launch constellations of thousands more satellites. In 2021, more than 1,000 new satellites joined the LEO ring. But more than 3,000 older satellites are inactive. The presentation zooms in dramatically on one of the animated satellites until it fills the screen. Many satellites are 40, 50, 60 years old now. Space is a very difficult environment. Dosimeters have found that ionizing radiation caused by CMEs create waves that— "Explain it to your children," Mitnick reminds Hegde. "Sorry." Hegde swallows. He resumes twisting the straw in his hands and it springs away. It falls in the ketchup on Quinn's French fries. Space radiation, intense, very bad. Satellites expected to last 5 to 15 years. The satellite that fills the screen breaks apart into component pieces. Text callouts fade in, labeling the various parts. If a satellite is not hit by space debris, it will run out of fuel or wear out its batteries. Eventually, it becomes unresponsive to commands from Earth control. Hegde looks around the table to make sure everyone is following. "What happens then?" Quinn asks. "We cannot leave it as a useless piece of junk in LEO. That LEO ring is valuable and crowded." The presentation pulls out as the subject satellite reunites itself. Animated guidance rockets fire on the satellite and it ascends out of frame. When we think the satellite is near the end of its useful life, we send it one last thruster command. If it is a low, small satellite, we slow it at periapsis. Earth's gravity pulls it in and it burns up in re-entry to Earth's atmosphere. If it is a larger, higher satellite, its final command is to push past apoapsis to HEO, high Earth orbit. It does not have enough fuel to escape Earth's gravity, but we can get it out of the way of the busier low orbit. The presentation pulls back to show a ring of satellites forming a circle around the Earth. Then it pulls back farther and shows a second ring, much farther from Earth, moving slowly. If LEO is roughly 12,500 miles from Earth's center, HEO is more than 26,400 miles above Earth's center, about a tenth of the distance to the Moon. There, Earth has a graveyard of thousands of satellites. They are useless, destined to circle until they disintegrate. Then Hegde's eyes spark as he turns to the table and adds, "Theoretically." His little audience waits for him to continue. Finally, Manny prompts, "But in reality, governments have acted conservatively. They thrust a satellite away when it still has 5 to 8% of its battery and fuel. It is better to waste a bit of its resources than to wait too long and let it turn into an uncontrollable obstruction. Most of these dead satellites can probably respond to more commands." "These HEO satellites," Quinn asks, "how many belong to Russia and China?" Hegde answers readily. "Russia and China combined have at least 600 satellites in orbit, some geosynchronous, some polar, some precessing. In fact, most use Molniya orbits with inclinations between 63 and 116 degrees, so the argument of perigee." Hegde sees Mitnick inhale to correct him, so he corrects himself. "I mean to say, roughly 300 are inactive HEO. Hegde touches the laptop trackpad. In the animation, about a tenth of the satellites in the HEO ring briefly fire their thrusters. They each slowly begin to drift back toward Earth. "My theory," the scientist says, "is that Bach has coordinated with China and Russia to unify command of their inactive satellites. If so, they can order roughly 300 satellites to thrust out of HEO toward Earth. Distance makes them slow to respond, and some percentage cannot receive command signals any longer. But let's propose conservatively a 1-to-3 ratio." "Meaning out of 300, 100 respond?" Manny asks. Yes. Hegde looks very happy to be understood. "I estimate more, but I am reasoning conservatively on purpose. Thus, with one well-calculated rocket thrust, each dead HEO satellite pushes toward LEO and then intentionally runs out of momentum in the LEO ring." The lights finally come on for Quinn. "My God," he blurts. "So the zombie satellites get in front of the GPS satellites and stop?" Higda's face strains as he tries to reduce his argument to words of one syllable. "In space, nothing stops, but relative to active LEO satellites, they are either not rotating with Earth or traveling very slowly. Then they simply wait." After a second, he adds, "Zombie satellites, I like that. Living dead satellites." "Ha!" Hegde turns to the laptop screen again. The high satellites drift into the path of the low satellites. Seconds later, the low satellites, whizzing around Earth every 90 minutes or so, smash into the formerly dead satellites. Video game-style explosions and fire highlight the collisions. "In essence," Hegde concludes, "the old satellites create a barrier in LEO. If Bach has the coordinates of the GPS satellites, he can take them out selectively. If he does not have that data, an educated guess will destroy most of them, plus some collateral damage. Of course, Kessler syndrome is a significant risk." "Well, obviously," Quinn says to Danny. "For sure," Danny agrees. Mitnick sighs at their deadpan antics. "Mr. Hegde, tell them what Kessler syndrome is." A few satellites collide. They create debris. Depending on the angle of impact, the debris continues traveling at the speed of the original satellite, but in random directions. Thus, that debris in turn hits other satellites, which also disintegrate into debris. Kessler syndrome posits a chain reaction where wreckage begets wreckage. Hegde shrugs. Maybe all the low satellites get incapacitated. All? Danny exclaims. Mitnick interprets. So not only no GPS, no surveillance satellites, no weather satellites, no communication satellites. If you're on the dish network, no you're not. Aghast, Quinn asks, if modern communications go away, how does Bach benefit, or anybody? Mitnick answers, total chaos is not his preferred outcome. Look at who's paying him. They probably just want US GPS gone. However, if he knows it might be coming, as a billionaire, he can direct his investments to benefit from chaos. For example, he can short SpaceX and Blue Origin and go long on Russian and Chinese aerospace. He could already have Skyhouse divisions building satellites now that no competitor knows will be needed. Then he's the only vendor ready when the government needs to replace its satellites. Manny, processing the information, says slowly, if the long-term goal of China and Russia is a sneak attack on the U.S., he can sit it out in another hemisphere. Mitnick piles on. For all we know, he might have a private island he can flee to, with independent resources for power, predicting weather, and using hard-cabled internet. He could ride out the day-to-day inconvenience while amassing fortunes off the rebuild effort. Hegde repeats, with adequate data, the attack might be surgical, block the U.S. GPS satellites with no collateral damage. But orbital mechanics would require very precise firing of the dead HEO satellites. This type of in-plane maneuver would probably require a Hohmann transfer because they need fuel efficiency while making tangential orbits into collinear. As to children, Mitnick reminds, Once again, stopping Hegde's momentum seems to jolt him. I say, the transmission window for the zombie satellites, he nods to Quinn, thankful for the simpler jargon, would be very narrow. It must happen at the correct minute. Then probably, Manny realizes, that quantum encrypted data we recovered is telemetry for either the GPS satellites or the graveyard satellites. Maybe authentication and authorization codes too. Hegde agrees. He would need satellite telemetry, hand-over words, ephemeris and ephemerides, almanacs, NAV corrections. Quinn has no idea what most of that means. He feels compelled to break it down to what his brain can hold. Recap. This billionaire asshole is going to use zombie satellites to make a lethal speed bump in space to wipe out American GPS, right? We know what he's up to. We have video footage of him plotting with foreign nationals, transcripts, eyewitnesses to the payoffs. He glares at Mitnick. Why the fuck are we not arresting Bach today? Now! Mitnick exhales and pinches the bridge of her nose. Before she can respond, her phone vibrates. She looks. Answers. Yes, sir. We're eating downstairs. Yes. See you in 5. She disconnects, then addresses the table. He wants us back upstairs. Chop chop. Chapter 18. Thus begins a clumsy procession of clearing the tables, finding trash cans for their plates and cups, milling around, finding a restroom, using the restroom, getting to the elevator. Not that Quinn has a next appointment. He's just bored by all the table talk. Plus, the big picture has left him dejected. He wants to do something about it. In the elevator, he finds himself standing next to Mitnick, who smells like expensive hair product. She's seizing the moment in the elevator to refresh her lipstick after eating. He asks her, the retired general, grumpy as hell, what's his problem? His problem, she responds, is that he is a brilliant man who had a severe stroke 2 years ago. It gave him a mean streak and he goes in and out of comprehending normally. This is who qualifies to be in your network of trust? His sharpness goes in and out, but it's mostly in. He's forgotten more than we'll know about space defense. Off Quinn's skeptical gaze, she adds, we're unofficial. We take who we can get. She returns a hard-eyed look of her own. You think you were our first choice? Quinn has no response to that. For a stupid politician, Mitnick seems pretty sharp. 15 minutes expire before they all sit again in the conference room at the top of Columbia Center. General Schaefer looks much better than when they left him. Mitnick says to Kerkhoff, Shadowfast poses the question with all the evidence they've gathered, why don't we immediately arrest Brody Bach? She looks at Quinn and answers him bluntly, nothing you've gathered is admissible in court. Sure it is, Quinn contradicts. He's not a lawyer, but he's had his own run-ins with the rules of evidence. To the courts? We're just concerned citizens who freely gave info to the government. This is the drawback of being secret and unofficial, the man explains. Ben Sinister has no arrest power. We have no legal authority. We, too, are mere concerned citizens. That's all. Bullshit, Quinn protests. You forced us to do your will. You have soft power. Mitnick sounds exasperated. He's a billionaire, Quinn. He has pull, resources, no moral compass. You don't wound a man like that. If you make a move, you take him out completely, or his slapback will hurt you more than you hurt him. Quinn wants to object, but he can't. Billionaires are constantly in the news with scandals. Guys like Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein finally getting caught, but only after decades of getting away with shit. He knows most of the rich pay no consequences for their crimes. Mitnick has a point, and it gnaws at him. Your evidence does what we needed it to do, the man encourages. You've shown us what he's doing. If Mr. Hegde's theory is correct, we might even know how. But even if we leak this data to the proper authorities, they'll need time to respond, and even more time to confirm it following the rules, time we might not have. We outwitted him in Seattle, Quinn says. We outwitted him in Seoul. What do we have to do to take him out completely? The room goes silent. Finally, Danny says, we catch him in the act. Outside the two glass walls of the conference room, dusk blankets Seattle and city lights come on. To the west, the sun below the horizon tints the clouds salmon. Inside the room, the weather turns darker too. Isn't that too late? Mitnick asks sharply. You document him launching an attack, you've got him cold, but the GPS system is gone. The man objects, and what is there to catch? If he has logins and launch codes, he'll feed them to his technical team. It's not like Brody will stand over a big scary button so you can record him pressing it. Given his ego, Quinn says, he might. How do you know when he'll strike? General Schaefer asks. Isn't that information missing? Quinn cedes the point. We don't know when and we don't know where. Like, how does his attack initiate? The general ponders. One obvious target is the GPS master control station at Schriever. Control keeps the whole constellation on track. I have contacts in Colorado Springs near the Air Force Base, Mitnick says. I can encourage them to redouble their defenses, but I suspect they're already prepared for anything Bach could attempt at the physical base. Manjunath Hegde, slumping in his seat, says meekly, perhaps I can help. Every head in the room turns to him. He swallows. He starts anew. Space aeronautics is a small industry. Skyhouse has a product launch next week. They're celebrating with a gala at the Museum of Pop Culture. As an astrobiologist of some note, I am invited. Bach will be there? Quinn asks. Very much so, Hegde says. He loves these events. How do you say, limelight, spotlight, much attention? Quinn asks, do you know him well enough to speak to him at the gala? Hegde's eyes widen, and he shakes his head vigorously. Oh, I am not a big man like him. Skyhouse employees will be there. Do you know any of them? Oh, yes. I have worked with many. We still go to the same conferences. We have much in common, professionally. Some are drinking buddies. An idea starts to shape in Quinn's mind. too vaporous to call a plan. How would you rate your short-term memory, Manjunath? Hegde looks happy. Most excellent. Then I believe we can turn you into a social engineer. Hegde looks confused. Spy stuff, Manny explains. James Bond at the party, in a tux, learning secrets, looking glamorous. Spy stuff, Hegde marvels. I am not skilled. Then he looks at Quinn and Manny, hopefully. But I am highly motivated. You will teach me? Quinn stares back at the nervous man and tries to picture him charming anyone. He says, highly motivated will do. Behind his encouraging smile, he thinks, we hope. Chapter 19. May's work environment began dark as an underground cave, just the way she likes it. But now her 4 large monitors bathe her in a blue glow. Her slender fingers reflect the red LED backlights from her custom keyboard. Across the computer lab from her, a full server rack fills the room with the dull roar of cooling fans so processors can assess and harmonize a petabyte of video. How the Chinese government obtained footage from every camera in several square miles of Seoul is not something May lets herself wonder about. Politics interfere with the beauty of the algorithms and the objectivity of the AI. Though she didn't let on, the challenge intimidated her at first. Now she feels the pride of a challenge overcome and the thrill of adding to her programming strengths as a data scientist. Receiving video clips from every bank ATM, traffic camera, social media post, and store surveillance system around an industrial marketplace in Seoul required that first she invent a reference system to label every clip accordingly, or how would she even know what she had? How would she know if any clips were duplicates? Then she needed the machines to examine the metadata and sequence the clips in chronological order. Another step of transcoding occurred to harmonize the frame rates, resolution, and file formats of all the various sources. The facial recognition assessment came last. All of it required her manual supervision. But what they asked her to find, she found. A light, rapid knock sounds on the door behind her, followed immediately by the door opening. Someone hits a light switch and fluorescent ceiling tubes stutter on. As she swivels her chair, she blinks like a mole accidentally uncovered by a bulldozer. May catches her breath, but quickly covers her reaction. The famous tech billionaire Brody Bach saunters into the room, accompanied by May's boss Sun and his functionary, Yu. Bach is saying something in English. He is always talking. May doesn't know his language, but his face announces his displeasure. Sun steeples his fingers and says something in calm, smooth English that seems to mollify the billionaire. Then Sun turns to May and in her native Mandarin asks, "Are you ready to show what you found?" "Yes, sir," May answers. "Shall I put it on the largest monitor?" Sun agrees. The trio of men step closer, surrounding May as she works her keyboard. She gestures gracefully to the monitor, then presses play. A very outmoded surveillance cam recorded this video, shooting in black and white, standard definition, and a mere 8 frames per second. The camera was mounted at least 4 meters above ground, May surmises, on a lamppost. The image looks down on 2 men dressed in black in an industrial marketplace. One stands on the ground with the slender build of youth reaching overhead. The other is on the roof of a small structure. The man on the roof struggles to lower a third man from the roof to the ground. The third man, fully limp, looks unconscious or possibly dead. The man on the ground struggles to receive the dead weight. Both active men have their backs to the camera. They wear knit caps and long sleeves. Nothing identifies them. The moment the video begins, Bach murmurs low surprise and soon agrees in English. Then Bach registers the timestamp in the lower corner of the frame. He touches it. He chatters an animated burst of English at Sun, pointing at himself, pointing at the footage, looking incredulous. Sun nods endlessly and makes sympathetic sounds. Now the dead man dangles almost entirely from the roof. The man on the roof holds him by each ankle, leaning back in a partial squat and straining to leverage against the dead weight. The man on the ground decides he can get a better grip from a different position and steps around the upside-down dangling body. He now faces the camera. Clumsily, the man on the ground receives the body as the man on the roof lets go. The body dumps headfirst, slowed just enough not to burst on the pavement. The man on the ground looks up at his partner in relief. May freezes the playback. She has been through hours of footage, and in aggregate, it seems to show 4 men in the aftermath of a crime spree dispensing of dead bodies. They showed an almost shocking amount of savvy in keeping their faces turned away from the cameras across the city. May can't imagine where she'd begin if she had to walk across even 5 blocks of downtown Beijing without allowing a camera to catch her face, and she assumes Seoul has similar surveillance. In all the video from all the sources, these are the only 4 frames that show this man's face. She scales up the image so the face fills more of the screen. She sharpens the image to the best of her ability. It doesn't look great, but it's enough. The image reveals the man as a young Caucasian, aged somewhere in his 20s. Bach and Sun chatter energetically. Sun reaches out and touches the monitor, pointing out the strange thing about the young man. His eyes are entirely black. He has no whites to his eyes. Brody stares at the face. May sees him chewing on his lower lip and thinking. He says something, then Yu translates. May, do you have any frames of this man where his hair shows? May demurs as diplomatically as possible. I regret to inform our guest the men wore those knit caps in all the footage. After further discussion with Brody, Sun tells Yu, our guest does not recognize the men. Please make a note. Then to May, show the second one. May has never been a fan of graphic user interfaces or mouses. She speedily types at the command line, and a different video clip takes over her main monitor. This one occurred roughly 42 minutes after the first clip, at a different part of town. The clip comes from one of the government traffic cameras dotted frequently along main thoroughfares. Like the first clip, this camera has a high angle. Unlike the first camera, this one is newer. The footage runs smoothly, maintains crisp focus and realistic color despite the nighttime lighting, and is recorded in 4K resolution. Diagonally across the frame, a 4-lane highway covers the lower left corner. In the late hour, a handful of cars streak past every few seconds, with occasional gaps of time when no vehicles pass. But the wide-angle lens takes in more than the highway. In the upper right corner of the frame, the viewer can see a riverbank, probably 15 meters lower than the highway. Small in the distance, it looks as if the same 3 men, one dead, have reappeared across town. The 2 active men in black fiddle with a body stretched out at the water's edge. May can see that the others in the room now realize what part of the frame matters, so she scales it up to make the 3 men fill her monitor. Zoomed in, they insert objects up the man's pant legs and long sleeves. Then they tape the pant legs and long sleeves shut at the ankles and wrists. With considerable effort, the 2 men lift the dead man. They wade ankle-deep into the moving river water, suspending the body between them. Then they swing the body in ever-growing swings to the side. 1, 2, 3, release. They send the body flying just a few feet deeper into the river. It drops with a splash and disappears. They watch for a few seconds, apparently waiting to see if the body might bob back to the surface. When it does not, the man on the right holds out a fist. The man on the left bumps it. When they step back to dry land, they turn side by side. The man on the right slaps the back of the man on the left. They face the camera as they step back onto the riverbank. There is a second when a lorry on the highway above casts a spill of headlights down into the river culvert. May freezes the image. This is one of 2 frames showing the face of the man on the right. They can see the man on the left too, with his weirdly dark eyes, but they have seen him before. The man on the right draws their attention. He too is Caucasian, approximately 40 years of age. Overheated after the exertion of swinging dead weight, he has just peeled off his knit cap. The freeze frame has caught him in the middle of finger-combing, long blonde hair. He has a confident grin on his face. May generally doesn't find white guys attractive, but this man's rugged good looks could change her mind. Bach and Sun chatter again, even more animated this time. Eventually, Sun says to you, "Mr. Bach does not recognize this man either. Make a note." He turns to May. Anticipating his question, she holds out 2 printouts she's made of the men's faces, as large as she could make them before the resolution turned muddy. Sun smiles and takes them with a nod. Using 2 hands, he presents them formally to Brody Bach. Brody accepts them and examines them. He asks a question, which you then translates to May. Our guest has access to facial recognition databases we do not. Send him copies of these 2 clips. May bows in assent. The billionaire can read the gesture without need of translation, and he looks satisfied. He rattles off more English. The way he's looking at May, she thinks he has just asked something about her. Then he faces her, puts his palms together with his fingers pointing upward, and gives her a small bow of thanks. She feels her face turn warm from the high-level attention. She smiles back and bobs her head in respect. Sun says, "He asked me if you did this without anyone's help. I assured him that as our best technician, you achieved it alone. He then asked if he could hire you for his own company. I informed him that we appreciate the honor, but the Chinese government finds you indispensable. You have acquitted us honorably, May. You, make a note." May is speechless. She never expected to earn such high praise from Sun, who rarely compliments his workers. She bobs her head, keeping her gaze firmly on the ground. But emboldened by the positive comments, she asks tentatively, "Who are these men in the videos?" Sun says dismissively, "Enemies of the People's Republic, but not for long. We know how to deal with such scum." And just like that, the 3 men forget May. Sun and Bach plunge into rapid-fire conversation as they sweep out of the room, with you scribbling notes. On the way out, Sun remembers May's preference, and as the lab door swings shut, his hand darts back into the room long enough to hit the light switch. May sits alone, plunged back into darkness.
Thank you for listening to Metal Lies, Book 2 in the Shadowfast Skyhouse Thrillogy. Continue the story for free on my YouTube channel, where I post episodes every Tuesday until the Thrillogy is complete. Don't want to wait? Grab the entire Thrillogy, Metal Spies, Metal Lies, and Metal Rise, as ebooks and paperbacks on Amazon, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, and most other online retailers. There's much more to the world of Shadowfast. Go behind the scenes by joining my newsletter list. To sign up, send your email address to shadowfast@colechase.media. Chase your adventure.